Payini Same Hrudayan Mapasarpatu Tvameva Mata Chapita Tvameva Bandhus Chasakha Tvameva Vidya Dravinam Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. That intense love which the ignorant bear towards the objects of this world, may I have that same intensity of love for thee. For thou art our mother, thou our father, thou our only friend and companion. Thou art our wealth and only knowledge, O God of gods. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning we have an unusually small crowd because this being the end of Durga Puja, so many people have gone to the puja and some people are traveling also right now. But I'm glad that all of you could come. And the talk this morning is the art and science of worship. So, as I often do, I like to start with the meaning of things, definitions of things. And so worship, I didn't realize this until I went to prepare. Last night I prepared some comments for today. And I didn't realize that the English word worship, which I had assumed came from some Latin or Greek root, though I didn't know what it would be. But it actually is an Old English word. It's neither Latin nor Greek, where many of the religious terms, including religion itself, that we use in English come from, especially from Latin, because of the influence of the Roman Church. But worship is an Old English word which meant giving worth to something. Worthship. It would be in modern English, but in Old English it was vershipe, and it means giving worth to something, that is valuing something. And so the worship means to honor, to adore, even in modern parlance, where to worship means to honor, to adore, to recognize the value, and to offer acts of respect and honoring and adoration. In Indian languages, the Sanskritic languages, that is, including Sanskrit, there are several words which correspond in meaning to worship. One, of course, is puj, the dhatu, the verbal root puj, from which we get puja. An act of worship, a ritual worship, puja, comes from puj, meaning to adore, to pay honor to respect to. So it comes from the same meaning as the original meaning of worship. And then you have, of course, bhaj, like from which we get bhajan. And bhajan also means to adore, to pay respect, to offer respect to and to worship. And of course, bhajans are songs of worship. And then you have yaj, again the Sanskrit root. I'm going back to the roots of Sanskrit. Yaj, from which we get yaga and yajna, which mean the sacrifices. And so yaj means to offer. But that's also a fundamental meaning of worship, as I'll explain as we go forward. What distinguishes worship as an act as opposed to something like prayer. And prayer and worship, they share common ground, but they are distinct in certain areas also. So that root yaj, from which we get yajna and yaga, means to offer. And specifically in the Vedic rites, one would offer into the fire. through the Agnihotra and other fire sacrifices, the home fire and other sacrifices. One would make offerings into the fire. And so we still do that in Homa and Agnihotra, etc. So now worship is, the phenomenon of worship is universal. You find it in all societies, and you find it in the most ancient record of human beings. Wherever you find human remains, you usually find, either with the remains or nearby, you find articles which are presumed to have been articles of worship. And so the impulse to worship is something which is universal. That I saw even in the old Soviet Union. I went to the Soviet Union in 1968, before some of you were born. not all of us, but some of you. In 1968, I went to the old Soviet Union. I traveled to, at that time, Leningrad, which is now St. Petersburg, the old name, and Moscow. And in Moscow, I was there on Easter Sunday in 1968. And so in those days, as is true even now in China and some other communist countries, you can't travel anywhere without a guide. You have to have a guide with you. And so on Easter Sunday that year, the Russian guide took us to Lenin's mausoleum in the Red Square. And there you found this large mausoleum out in the Red Square. It's still there. And there was a line of people more than a mile long, people coming to offer Easter lilies at Lenin's tomb. And so this was a communist state. This was supported by the communist government. In fact, it was encouraged by the communist government. It would be a great embarrassment to them if nobody showed up. So some people certainly showed up out of heartfelt love and admiration, and other people because it looked good to come, which is kind of the way many people go to church or to temple. Some will come because they want to, and others because it looks good to come. But there was a mile-long line of people coming to lay these Easter lilies at the tomb of Lenin. And so you see, even in a communist state, you see in a place like North Korea, where Kim Jong-un and his father and grandfather, they became objects of worship. Not just statesmen that people respected and said, "Oh, hello, sir, how are you? We really appreciate what you're doing for our country," and so forth. No, it's worship that they offer to the head of state. And in this country, which has America among Western countries, America is a very religious country, much more than most Western countries, unless you get into the Latin countries. Their religion is very strong. But among, say, America, Australia, European countries, America is more religious than most. But even then, here, most of society is very secularized. And so you find that in place of religious figures, people worship sports heroes, they worship movie stars. It's phenomenal, the interest that people have in the lives of movie stars. Some of them are very good people. Many of them are the most miserable people in the world. And yet they're objects of worship. And the same with, well, not so much politicians anymore. There have been times when politicians were worshipped. That's rare nowadays. But sports stars, etc. Sports stars also, if you look at their lives, though there's some very good people who are sports stars, but many of them, their lives are absolutely miserable. Yet that urge to worship is so natural, so much a part of us, that you find it universal. Even in a secularized society, people take up movie stars and sports figures. In a communist society, they take up the leader and founder of the communist state. Even though they actively suppress religion and all religious practices, they promote the worship of their founders. And so it's substituting one thing for another. But that will to worship, the need to worship, the impulse to worship, that is universal. So that's what we want to examine today. So First of all, why is it that we find it universal? The main central reason is that our own lives we find insufficient. And so we look to something which promises fulfillment. We find ourselves very limited in power, limited in knowledge, limited in understanding, and so forth, limited in freedom. So we look to those who have exceeded the normal bounds of life. And if those are deities, then from primitive deities who are really more like superheroes than what we think of as a deity now, or more advanced deities, those that are transcendent, those who are omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, etc. You get the spectrum of worship of those who have exceeded the bounds that I experience in my life. And so worship is the recognition of that which is greater than myself. And that which I worship because I recognize that. And because by worshiping greatness, I am unconsciously, we don't usually think of this, but by worshiping greatness, I'm participating in greatness. By worshiping, I am becoming a part of that which I worship. Worship connects me to that which I worship. And so if I worship movie stars, I somehow feel that some of their glamour is rubbing off on me. And I start looking in the mirror to see if I can pose like a movie star and find that I fail miserably. So I worship them some more, hoping that I'll be better at it. And so this will to worship is the recognition of that which is greater than myself, more free, more knowing, more blissful, more powerful than myself. In fact, a person who cannot bow their head in recognition, I don't mean in servitude or a slavish attitude, but one who can't bow before greatness, there's something lacking in them. It means that they can't recognize that there's something greater than their own feeble imagination. And so worship is the free recognition of that. And worship, real worship, doesn't come by somebody telling you, you've got to worship so-and-so. You've got to come and bow before our altar. You've got to worship. And you've got to... No, that's not worship. That's slavery. That's submission to external coercion. But worship comes when you recognize greatness and you bow before it naturally because you recognize the glory of that which you are recognizing. And again, as I said, unconsciously we feel that we are participating in it by opening ourselves to it. If you meet a great person, someone that you've admired for a long time, and you have the chance to meet them, if you go to them with love and respect, then the chances are the person will respond very well to you. Not necessarily because they're subject to flattery and so forth, but just because they recognize, oh, look at this person. They have opened themselves to me. Let me open myself to them. And so in recognizing greatness, in honoring greatness, we are opening ourselves and also opening the object of our veneration to us, so that there is a venue of communication, a path of communication, an underlying unity which allows for communion. So you find, as I said, the will to worship is universal. You find it even in the even among non-dualists. For instance, if you read the Ashtavakra Samhita, a great non-dualistic text, and some of you who are very fond of Swami Sarvapriyananda's YouTube lectures, he often speaks on the Ashtavakra Samhita. So in the Ashtavakra Samhita, you'll find verses where Ashtavakra or Janaka, the teacher or the disciple, says things like, Aho aham namo mahyam, salutations, how wonderful am I, salutations to myself. Aho aham namo mahyam, wonderful am I, salutations to myself. That is, it's not egotism. It's not, oh, how wonderful is Swami Atmarupananda, how glorious I am, salutations to Swami Atmarupananda, who I am. No, not like that. It's recognizing the universal self which I am. But When I look within, I'm struck with wonder. When I look without, I'm struck with wonder. Everywhere, there's nothing but wonder because of the infinity of the self. And so the mind, in a sense, recognizing and knowing, even the knowing mind, the mind that's immersed in that non-dualistic experience, it sometimes separates itself a little bit and looks in wonder at itself. And so even in the non-dualistic tradition, there is that sense of wonder. And of course, among non-dualists, you'll find a great reverence for their teacher who led them to the non-dualistic identity. So you find the worship of the teacher and even worship of oneself. So you remember in Sri Ramakrishna's life, when he was still doing the puja to the Divine Mother, before he became completely incapable of doing puja, because he saw everything as divine, and so then who is to offer what to whom, when everything is divinity. But when he was approaching that stage already, then sometimes the offerings that were to be given to the Divine Mother, he would offer to himself because he saw this also as the Divine Mother. He would offer the flowers to himself, the food, the bhog, the food that was to be offered to the Divine Mother. He would take it and say, "Oh, Mother, do you want me to eat?" And then he would take and say, "Here, I'm eating," and eat the bhoga that was to be offered to the Divine Mother. And so even in non-dualism, you find the urge to worship is there. And even in a secular state, the urge for worship is there. So again, it's a universal phenomenon. So I mentioned prayer. Let me say that prayer and worship are two of the most universal of the devotional sort of exercises. And as I said, worship isn't restricted to those who are devotional by temperament. It's even one of the stages in the path of the Buddhist bodhisattva. They have a stage in their path of worship. They also have a stage in their path of prayer. But prayer and worship are typically thought of as devotional exercises, where you think of I, the devotee, and God, the beloved, whom I'm worshiping through love. And so, as I said, prayer and worship share a lot of common ground, and then they diverge in certain areas. And that is, prayer itself can be worship. Prayer can be worship. But prayer is often asking of God, whether it's asking things which we don't recommend because that makes your relationship with God transactional. You give me such and such, and then I'll have devotion for you. No, but we pray for understanding, pray for strength, pray for guidance, pray for light, pray for illumination, pray for spiritual advancement, etc. So prayer is often a yatana, a seeking from God. As Jesus says in the Christian, if you seek, you will find. And prayer is seeking. Prayer is to say that if you don't believe in God, then pray, "Oh God, if you exist, please reveal yourself to me. Let me know whether you exist or not." It's a strange prayer, because you're saying that, sir, I don't even know if God exists or not. I don't believe in God. I don't know whether God exists or not. And then Sri Ramakrishna says, well, if that's the case, then pray to God. Do you exist? So it's a strange advice which requires at least a little bit of faith, but it's psychologically true. Otherwise, Sri Ramakrishna wouldn't have said it. It's psychologically effective because when you pray, you begin to find that there's a response. And there's one of the places where prayer meets worship. Because in worship also, when you offer to God, after some time, you begin to feel that there is an awareness which is receiving that which I offer. No, you don't see a hand reach out and take the thing that you've given, something like that. But you begin to feel that there is a wonderful awareness, which is receiving. And so, but prayer generally is, again, a seeking, a asking, a petitioning. And worship comes from this sense of adoration. And so in a sense, worship is giving. whether it's giving praise, giving adoration, or giving in sacrifice, making offerings. Worship is characterized by giving, and prayer of praise, where it's also giving, then it's usually a seeking. So worship is always a giving, whether it's expressed through a ritual or through prayer. Let me make a distinction between a ritual worship and magic. There is an important distinction, and it's sometimes recognized among academic scholars in religion as well. Not all, but some make this distinction, and I think it's an important distinction. And let me say that I'm not speaking against everything that goes under the rubric of magic. As Swami Vivekananda, in the West, those who practiced Raja Yoga, the internal disciplines of Patanjali's yoga, they were witches. It's not that all that goes under magic is bad. Between magic is, in magic the idea is whereas in ritual shouldn't worship. Worship depends on the concentration of mind of the worshiper. So if I do a worship here and my mind is somewhere else, it's not that just because I went through the motions and I said all of the words and I did all of the things and made all of the offerings while saying all of the words, that the result is perfect. No, it's imperfect, because the whole purpose of spiritual ritual worship is to focus the mind. And it's the focused mind which produces the results, not drawing diagrams and making mudras and things like that. Those have their meaning, they have their purpose, but they're not magic. It's not that if I do this over some water, suddenly the water has been transformed. So as I said, in Hindu and Christian and Buddhist and all forms of religious worship, you find magic creeping in because of the natural human tendency to want automatic results. I've gone to all this trouble, so I want the results. And so I don't mean this as any criticism of Christianity, because again, the same thing is found in Hinduism, as I'll say, but just to give an example, in Christianity, the idea that the Eucharist performed by any priest is just as effective whether the priest is leading a moral life or an immoral life or whatever. That the Eucharist is just as effective. The church had to come up with that doctrine, because otherwise what would the people do? If they have a worthless priest, that's all that they've got, then you're leaving them without recourse. And so the church has to say that whatever doesn't depend on the priest. If the priest has been authorized to do the worship, the body and blood of Christ are present in the worship. Now, the same thing happens in Hinduism, where you go to temples and you see the priests just cursorily doing the worship and then asking for money, and it's just a business. Now, there are great temples in India where the priests are very sincere. They know what they're doing and they're very sincere. But there are others who don't know what they're doing. They just do it as a business, and it's their way of making money rather than running a shop or something like that. So, so the same thing happens in all traditions, and in India also with the growth of the great tantric tradition. But much of the tantra turned into just magic. Also, you make some diagram, As Swami Vivekananda said in criticism of that, he said, do you think that God is such a fool that you draw some diagram on the ground and God has to dance for you just because you made some diagram on the ground? No, just making diagrams and showing mudras and saying words and things, that has no effect unless the mind is present within it. The whole purpose is to focus the mind. So that's the difference between spiritual worship and magic. Magic says you just do the action and the result comes automatically because it's just a mechanical process. Worship says no. It's a matter of consciousness. Where is your consciousness? Is your consciousness focused? I've seen the difference myself. I've been in many worships and many times where it's nice, it's uplifting and everything, beautiful, but you feel nothing. And I've been in a worship where, for whatever reason, in fact, the first time I felt this, I couldn't find a reason other than just the Divine Mother herself revealing herself, where the whole atmosphere in the room where the worship was being done was charged with electricity. It was just, it was amazing. The hair would stand on end. And it wasn't because we were going into ecstasy from our standpoint, but something in the room itself changed. There was some manifestation of spiritual power, and you couldn't help but feel it. It was so striking. And so the worship depends on the ability to focus your mind. Now, worship as a practice, even if we can't focus our minds, worship is a wonderful way to gradually train us to worship our minds. It's a wonderful practice. So I don't mean to say that if you can't focus your mind, then you shouldn't worship. You're being a hypocrite. No. Worship is a wonderful thing if we're using it to try to focus the mind, trying to develop a relationship. So let me say a little bit about the art of worship, and then I'll come to the science of worship. On the art of worship, the elements that go into, typical elements that go into worship. One of these comes from the very root, as I explained in the beginning, the root of the word worship, that is to praise and to honor. And so in the act of worship, you find often hymns of praise, prayers of praise, hymns of praise, of adoration, and so forth. When you come into a shrine, into a temple, you bow before the altar. That itself is worship. It's a simple act, but what are you doing? You're recognizing the presence of divinity. Whether you feel it or not, you're recognizing that, recognizing the presence of divinity. Whether it's manifested or not, whether you feel it or not, but you recognize that divinity is said to be here. So let me offer my adoration. So when we go into a shrine, any shrine, in a home, in a temple, on the roadside, if we go to a shrine and bow down, don't ever go into a shrine and think, oh, there's the altar, let me bow down to the altar because there's the altar. No, go in and think, you are here. I'm bowing down to you. I'm bowing down to you. Not by, oh, there's the picture of Sri Ramakrishna, let me bow to the picture of Sri Ramakrishna. No. Oh, you are here. I bow down to you. Oh, Mother, you are here. I'm bowing down to you. Make that a practice. When you bow in a shrine, at the home, and on the street, of course in America you don't find them on the street, but in Italy you do, and in some Latin countries you do, but not in America. But in a temple or in the home, then I'm bowing down to you. You are here. I bow to you. I recognize you here. So have that attitude. So we find just the act of bowing is a form of praise and adoration. We find it in singing, bhajans, hymns, religious songs. That's a wonderful way of worship. The bhajans that are sung in India, the hymns that are sung here, that's a wonderful way of adoring the divine presence, because music has the ability, music which is well done, music has the ability to focus the mind like nothing else. Visual art is wonderful, visual art is beautiful, but visual art you can look at or you can look away from, and if you look at it, you can just sort of ignore it. Music you can't ignore. If there's music playing, you find, even if it's annoying music, you're in a store and it's getting close to Christmas and you enjoy some Christmas music, but others you can't stand. So the music is playing, even songs you don't like, you find you start going like this. And just because the rhythm gets to you, it gets inside of you. So music is an extraordinary vehicle for worship. Swami Vivekananda said that music is the highest worship for those who understand it. Music is the highest worship for those who understand it because it carries the mind to higher regions very easily. It's very easy to focus the mind through music. So that's one form of worship. Another, of course, associated with bhajan is nama sankirtan. Singing like this, the things like the Lalita Sahasranama, Vishnu Sahasranama, Shiva Sahasranama, Ramakrishna Sahasranama, Uma Sahasranama, etc. Singing the Nama Sankirtana, the praise of the names of God. They have a similar tradition in Christianity, in the Catholic tradition, and it's probably in the Orthodox tradition too. But the Catholic tradition, they have what are called litanies. So I brought one example here. I'll just read a few lines of it. And a litany is like Nama Sankirtana. It takes an aspect of God, and in Christianity that would mean God the Father or the Holy Spirit, or more often Jesus and Mary, or it could be of a saint, but most often of Jesus, Mary, or God the Father. Those are the three that are most common. And so this particular litany is a litany to the baby Jesus. And so there's an introductory section, just as you find in the Sahasranamas. There's an introductory section before you get to the actual names, like Shiva. Parvati asks Shiva, "Oh Shiva, what are your blessed names?" And Shiva says, "Well, Parvati, I have so many names, but here are 1,000." And then begins the Sahasranama. So like that in the litany, there's a beginning introduction, and then it begins, "Infant Jesus, have mercy on us. Infant, very God. Infant, Son of the living God. Infant, Son of the Virgin Mary. Infant, begotten before the morning star. Infant, Word made flesh. Infant, wisdom of your Father. Infant, purity of your mother. Infant, firstborn of your mother. Infant, image of your Father. Infant, creator of your mother." Jesus was the creator of his own mother. "Infant, splendor of your Father, honor of your mother, equal to your Father, subject to your mother, joy of your Father, riches of your mother, gift of your Father, offering of your mother." And so creator of man, power of God, our brother, perfect man from your conception, ancient in wisdom from your childhood. And so it goes on for a couple of pages. And so like the Sahasranamas or the Nama Sankirtan, a very beautiful practice which is done. So that also is a form of worship. Again, worship is when you give praise, adoration, or make an offering. It's an act of giving. Giving love, giving your heart, giving your attention, giving gifts, etc. So then in the hymns, like in the Chandi, right now is the season of the Chandi, the Devi Mahatmyam, because of Durga Puja. You find the beautiful hymn of Brahma and other hymns of in the Chandi to the goddess. Tvam Swaha, Tvam Swadha, Tvam Hi, Vashatkara, Swaratmika, etc. Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Kshama Rupena Samsita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namah. All of these are offering worship to the Divine Mother. So that's one element of worship, the praise and honor. Another is giving back, offering back to God. And our arati, which we'll have after this talk, arati, that's a form of giving back. Now, not many people know the actual meaning of the arati. They know the waving of the lights, and you take the blessing from the light and all of that, and you recognize it as worship, but what the inner meaning of the arati is. The 5 elements that you offer in arati are the 5 elements of creation, out of which everything has been created. And again, this sounds like primitive superstition before people had the glories of modern science, but no, it's a very profound analysis of experience. So the light which is waved first, that represents Agni, which is fire, which is all that we see. Everything that we see is related to Agni. The eye sees Agni, fire. The conch shell is water. Water is associated with taste. So all that can be tasted is water. Then the cloth which is waved, that is space. You're clothing the deity in space. Just as a cloth has the warp and weft woven together, so space is the cloth which covers the divine, because God is everywhere and space is everywhere. And so space is the cloth which covers God. Digambara, clothed with the directions. And so you offer the cloth in offering that back to God. So you're offering all that can be seen, all that can be tasted, all the space which is associated with the ears. Then the flower, which is earth, that which is associated with smell, all that can be smelled. And then the chamara, that is wind, air, which is associated with touch. So how do we know the external world? Only through the five senses. We have no other way of knowing the external world. Even if we're blind and deaf, like Helen Keller, she was still aware of the external world. How? Through touch. She knew it through touch, through taste, and through smell. And so the only way that we know that there is an external world, otherwise we wouldn't even know that there is an external world, is through these five senses. And so in Arati, we're recognizing that all of these come from you, and we give them all back to you. You are their source. We use them through the day and night, but they all come from you, and we offer them to you as their source. And so another element of worship is giving back. In puja, when we do puja, and when I come to the science in a moment, I'll go into more detail on the puja. But in the puja, we offer different items in the puja. And before we offer them, we do mental worship, in which we offer all of those items mentally. So we offer the seat of our heart for God to come and sit within the heart. We offer water. The water, in the yoga tradition, it's said that here in the top of the head, it's associated with it's believed to be the pituitary gland, but here in the top of the head, there's nectar constantly dripping down, which is keeping the body vital. And so in the puja, you think that you're collecting that nectar and washing God's feet, the deity's feet with the nectar. You're offering it to rinse their mouth. You offer it for their bath. You offer light, which is everything that we see. We're offering the visual world with the light to the deity. We offer the flower to the deity, which is all that we smell. All of the sense organs we offer to the deity. We offer the kundalini, the sushumna with the lotus chakras. We offer that as a garland around the neck of the deity. We offer our restless motions of the body and mind as the dance for the deity. So you think that this body and mind are so restless, but let that be the dance which entertains you, O God. And so every aspect of your experience, there are other things also that go into it, but everything that you experience, all that you hear is the bell that is being rung. Every aspect of your experience is offered to the divine. That is, so another element of worship is this giving back. Seva, service, doing service, whether it's in a shrine or serving the poor, serving the needy, serving others, that also is giving back. And therefore, that also is worship. If we recognize that everyone is an embodiment of divinity. So everyone that I help, everyone that I offer something to, I'm not just giving charity, like a superior person giving charity to some poor wretch. No, I'm offering in worship to this embodiment of God who has come before me. So giving back through service. In some traditions, like in the Christian tradition, there used to be, and some people still do it, but not many, there used to be the tradition of tithing. And in the Mormon tradition, they're very strict about tithing, that you have to give a certain percentage of your income to the church. In the Muslim community, that tradition is there also, where you give a certain amount of your wealth to the service of Islam. And so in Judaism and other traditions as well. The highest giving is to give yourself, the offering of the heart. And every other giving that we do, whether it's praise, whether it's offerings in a puja, whether it's bhajans, singing, whether it's tithing, whatever it is that we do, everything is a vehicle towards that, is a symbol of that. Because the real giving that we want to do, the most worthy gift that we can give is ourself. Giving our heart, but the heart is who we are. The heart is the vital center of our being. I don't mean the blood pumping organ, but the center of our consciousness, center of our love. That is what we want to give to God. Everything else is a means for attaining to that, to the point where we can give ourselves wholeheartedly to God. And then there's a subset of giving, and that is sacrifice. Sacrifice in some form is recognized in all traditions. And of course, tithing is a form of sacrifice. In India, in Hinduism, I should say, all sacrifice is seen as coming from the Vedic tradition, where offerings were made into the fire. And the fire was what? The fire was the mouth of all of the gods. Agni, himself a deity, himself divine, was the mouth of all of the gods. So whatever you offered into the fire in Vedic times, it was considered that Agni took it to the respective deities for whom it was offered, because he was the opening into the world of the gods, the mouth of the gods, which means the opening into the world of the gods. And so all ideas of sacrifice in India, in Hinduism, I should say, because there are other traditions in India, but in Hinduism, all ideas of sacrifice are based on that image of offering into fire. And so that's why we say before our meals, we say that verse 24 from the 4th chapter of the Gita, Brahmarpanam Brahmahavir Brahmagno Brahmanahutam. That Brahman, that is ultimate reality, is the nature of that which is the nature of the offering. It's the substance which is offered. It's the fire into which the offering is made. And the one who makes the offering also is Brahman. And so one who sees Brahman in the midst of every action attains to Brahman. And so everything is seen in the light of that glorious Vedic sacrifice, where the sages would be seated in front of a ritually constructed fire on an altar that represented the whole universe. The universe itself was symbolically recreated as the altar. And then with Vedic chanting and these offerings made into the fire, it was a beautiful, radiant and glorious sacrifice. And so the idea of sacrifice in the Hindu tradition is something which is very glorious, because it has that Vedic image behind it, behind the idea of sacrifice. And so that we should foster, that we should keep. In fact, when we sannyasis, when we take sannyasa, when we become swamis, we do it in front of a fire, which is ritually created, and the presence of the divine is invoked into it, and we offer everything into the fire, including ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our reputation, our senses, everything is offered into the fire, ritually. And then at the end of the fire, we go and bow before the Guru, and the Guru gives us cloth of this color, which is the color of fire. And so then we are to be clothed in the fire after that. To always remind us that everything has been offered into the fire of the divine. So ritually, and so then the rest of life is an attempt to try to make that a conscious fact. So when we do action in karma yoga, and we offer the fruits of our actions to God, that also is sacrifice. That also is sacrifice. We're offering them into the fire of divinity. We offer the fruits of our action. When we, like in a puja, at the end of a puja, there's a point right at the end where we do a japa of the mantra of the deity whom we are worshipping. And then we take water in our palm and say, Om guhyati guhya gopta tvam grihanasmat kritam japam siddhir bhavatu me devi deva tvat prasarat maheshwara. O Divine Lord, you are the most secret of all secret things. Not secret in the things of keeping things secret, don't let anybody know, but secret because we've completely ignored it. It's present right here, the open secret, and yet we ignore it. We don't see it. It's right here, right in front of us, and yet we don't see it. So in that sense, secret of all secret things, Guhyati Guhya Gopta Tvam, you are the protector of the most secret of all secret things. Please accept this japa which I have done, and then you pour it out like so, and grant me perfection, O great Lord. Or if the deity is the Divine Mother, you say it to the Divine Mother. And so offering the fruits of meditation. And then the Buddhist tradition, the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, they had a beautiful tradition of offering everything that they did for the welfare of all beings. May the merit of this action which I have performed, may it go for the welfare of all beings. That is, not to take it to oneself, as let me collect punya for myself, but whatever I do, let me give it to the welfare of all. Swami Vivekananda was very fond of that idea. So again, the purposes of worship. The two main purposes. One is to cultivate love of the divine, and the other is to cultivate a sense of living relationship. Just as if you pray without knowing whether God is or is not, if you pray long enough, after some time you begin to feel that yes, someone is listening. Even though you haven't seen anything, nothing has happened, but you begin to, faith itself, or prayer itself engenders faith. And so with worship. When you offer worship day after day, you begin to feel that yes, God is accepting that which I offer. You begin to feel it internally. And so it's for the purpose of cultivating love and cultivating a living relationship with the divine. So now a little bit about the science of worship. And I'll speak for the science, let me speak about ritual worship. Not just prayer and bhajan and so forth, but ritual worship. Ritual, as Swami Vivekananda says, is concretized philosophy. Concretized philosophy. I can sit here and talk philosophy, talk about the nature of God, talk about the nature of the universe. And for most of us, it remains conceptual. Oh, nice concepts and everything. But then that philosophical concepts are translated into stories, and that's where you get mythology. Mythology is somewhat concretized philosophy. The mythology expresses in the form of story the same truths that philosophy tries to express in abstract terms. And so depending on the nature of a person's mind and education, some people prefer stories. They don't understand philosophy. They find it boring. It puts them to sleep. But if you tell them an interesting story, then they can hold on to that. And you find that that's why stories are so effective and so popular. That's why books are all about stories, most books, except when they're philosophical essays or something. But most books are story books, whether they are children's books or adult novels and so forth. They're all telling stories. Mythology is telling stories. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata, they're all story. And ritual is further concretizing and making philosophy kinetic. That is, bringing philosophy into action. So that philosophy is conveyed through act and object. That is, objects that are part of the puja and the actions within the puja. Philosophy becomes concretized into act and actions and objects. There are two main types of ritual worship. One type is a reenactment. And so in the Christian worship, the Eucharist, the Mass, That's a reenactment of the Last Supper, where Christ gave the wine and the bread to his disciples and said, here, this is my blood, which has been shed for all of you. Here, take of this. This is my body, when he gave them the bread. And so when they do the Mass, they're remembering that Last Supper, the first time that Christ did that. That's been done countless times since then in a reenactment. But what's the purpose of the reenactment? Is it to memorialize an ancient thing that happened? No. One of the things that's true of all religious worship, genuine spiritual worship, is that it brings us into a timeless moment. And so it's believed in the Christian tradition that when the Mass is performed, the wine and the bread are actually transformed into the body and blood of Christ, though you don't see it, but it's believed that substantially they've become the body and blood of Christ, and that by partaking of it, you're partaking of the original Last Supper. And so it turns the action into a timeless moment. Something which is a timeless moment, which enacts a timeless communion with the divine. And so one form of worship, again, is reenactment. In a sense, some of the Vedic sacrifices had an element of that. That wasn't the main part of them, but again, when you create the altar and it's created as a symbolic of the universe and the creation of the universe and so forth, there's a certain element of it which is a reenactment of the structuring and creation of the universe. In the Pueblo Indians, the Native Americans, the Pueblo Indians in the Southwest, including the Hopi, their ceremonies are reenactments also. Their belief was very much like the Vedic belief. The Vedic belief was that unless the Vedic ceremonies were properly performed, the universe itself would collapse. That it was the proper performance of the Vedic sacrifices which kept the universe as a cosmos. And so the Native American, Pueblo Indians in particular, they have that idea that they must continue to carry on their ceremonies because that's what keeps everything in the universe in its proper place and proper functioning. And so that also, in a sense, is a reenactment. So one type of worship is reenactment. Another type is entry into a spiritual realm. So the reenactment, that also includes entry into a spiritual realm. But some are just directly entering into a spiritual realm. So when we do a Hindu puja, that we're not reenacting something that once long ago somebody did something and now we're doing it because they did it. No, it's creating a timeless moment of communion with the divinity outside of ordinary time and space. Space is reconfigured, time is reconfigured, the individual who does the worship is reconfigured, the elements of the worship are reconfigured. Everything is spiritualized to enter into that timeless moment. Everything in the puja is highly symbolic. Every element of it is highly symbolic. And many people who do puja don't know the symbolism, but every part of it is symbolic. Let me say briefly the purposes, and then I'll just explain very briefly the stages of worship in the puja. So the purposes of a ritual worship, one purpose can be worldly gain, to get something. Just as with prayer, we can pray to God for a new house, for a better job, and so forth. So we can do worship to get something from God. That's considered the lowest worship, but it is worship. And so whether it's the Christian tradition or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever tradition, you find worship which is done for gain. Let me have a special puja done, Satyanarayan puja, so that my son will get good grades in his exam. Let me do a special worship so that my daughter's wedding comes off well. Let me do the special worship so that I can get out of the present bad circumstances I find myself in. The stars or something seem to be aligned against me, so let me try to get out from under this malevolent influence, whatever it is. Meaning just that I'm experiencing bad luck and I want to get out of it. So let me do a worship. So all of those are reasons for doing worship, and that you find in all traditions. But the higher reason for doing worship is, again, just the desire to experience and to connect and unify yourself with God. the spiritual advancement, doing it as a way of connecting to God. That's the higher reason for doing worship. And the third reason I should mention, and that's done in different traditions as well, worship can be done as a communal blessing. So like if we do a worship here for the Vedanta Society, when we do a special puja or something, like we have Kali Puja coming the end of this month, and we just had Durga Puja. Then the worshiper does it in our ashramas with the intention that it be for the welfare of all beings. And so it's done for the welfare of all. Yes, the worshiper and those who attend, they get a special blessing from the worship because of the atmosphere which is created. But it's also done as a communal blessing for the welfare of all beings. So, puja. Let me take up just puja as one form of worship, the Hindu form of worship. Of course, in Hinduism, there are other forms of worship too, but most common is the puja. So in the puja, and this I'll do very briefly because time is just about up. The elements of a puja, the basic elements which are combined in different ways to make up a puja are, of course, mantra, sacred words and phrases, mudra, different gestures with the hands, visualization, where you picture something in the mind, and action. You make an offering. You do something. So these are the main elements of worship. So you see, in the worship, you're using your speech. You're using your mind. You're using your body for action. So all parts of your being are being used in the worship. And that's what makes worship so effective. Puja, as well as other worships, but again, we'll talk about puja. I just don't want to make it sound like I'm saying that this is true of puja and not of other worships. But what makes worship so effective is that it uses all of you. When you try to meditate, you sit for silent meditation, and you say, okay, now I'm just going to focus on this one thing, the mantra or the ishta, or one thing, I'm going to keep the mind there. You find the mind just rebels. But if you do puja, you're using all of yourself, and so you naturally tend to be more focused. You're having to repeat mantras, you're having to visualize, you're having to do things with your hands, make mudras, you're having to offer things, you're having to keep in mind the things that you have to do. And so it's very easy to get the mind absorbed in that which you're doing. So that's what makes worship such an effective spiritual practice. The purpose of puja, the Hindu puja, and this is specific to Hindu puja. That was taught to me by a great pujari of our order, Swami Hitananda. He passed away decades ago, but I knew him. He was a very saintly Swami, highly regarded in the order. He was the most highly regarded pujari in his time in the order. And he had been the pujari at Belur Mutt for many years. When I knew him, he was retired, but he still would be called out of retirement to do pujas at special temple openings and special occasions and things. So he was the one who taught us puja in the training center when I was in training center in the seminary at Belur Mutt. And so he said that the purpose of puja is to teach Tat Twamasi, thou art that. The Mahavakya of the Upanishads, thou art that. You are that infinite reality. So puja, which appears very external and very objectified and very dualistic and everything, he said, no, the purpose of it is to imbue the mind with the idea tattvamasi. So we'll see that as we go through the process. So what is the process? First, the preparation. You purify all of the elements of the worship. Everything that's going to go into the worship, you purify it. You then purify your own body and mind. And then through a process called Bhuta Shuddhi, and then the invocation of the Jiva Nyasa, the invocation of the deity into yourself, you first, through visualization and mantra and pranayama, you think that you have destroyed your old karmic body, the body which is colored by your past karma. And you create out of the one indivisible consciousness a new spiritualized body based on the dictum, Devo Bhutva Devam Yajeta. Having become a god, one can worship the god. Devo Bhutva Devam Yajeta. Who can worship God? Only God can worship God. So we have to transform ourselves into God in order to really be able to worship God. And so you identify with a deity, and then you create a new spiritualized body, a body made out of consciousness in your imagination, yes, but it's a powerful imagination, in your imagination. And then you invoke the presence of the deity that you're going to worship in your heart. That is a symbol of your own Atman, your own self, whether it's Sri Ramakrishna, Durga, Kali, Holy Mother, whomever. That's your own self. And then you take, the meditation, you take a flower. Well, first you offer that deity worship, mental worship. And that's the most important part of the puja for the pujari, for the worshiper, is the mental worship. The external part of the worship is of secondary importance, and it's more for others. But for the worshiper, the internal worship is the main. So then you take a flower, you meditate in Kurma Mudra, and then you breathe the deity out of the heart onto the flower, and then you place the deity on the altar, and then you offer worship. So what have you done? You've recognized that the deity is here in my heart, which is where I am. That the real I am is the I am of the deity. And so you take that deity, you imagine it taking form, and then you take it ritually and put it on the altar, and then you make offerings. So you're objectifying your own infinite divine self as God, because God is your own self objectified. Swami Vivekananda used to say, always remember that the hand that reaches down in answer to your prayer is your own hand, is your own hand, is your own self. So you're not separate from God. It's not that I'm this weak little insignificant being and God is great and I'm such a wretch that I hope God will have mercy on me and save me because otherwise there's no hope for me. No, God is your own self. You love God because God is yourself. Love is that which brings union. Love is that which brings oneness. And so you love God because love brings you into union with God. And then you make offerings, and the offerings are all symbolic of the different aspects of our experience. But in the Hindu worship, because of the way that the tradition developed and so forth, the particular form that the offerings make is you think of God as your respected guest, and just as you would offer things to a guest, so you offer to God, who is your guest. Of course, the guest who has come from your heart here. And then you welcome them, swagatam, swagatam. Let's see, how does that first go? If I'm in the process of doing the puja, it comes naturally, but trying to go into the middle and take something out is always hard. Yasya darshanamichanti deva swabhishta siddhye tasmai te parameshana swagatam swagatam prabho. O you whose vision is desired by even the highest gods and goddesses, welcome to you today. Please come and be here with us. You offer swagatam, swagatam, welcome, welcome to them. Interesting, swagatam means the same thing, literally means the same thing as welcome. Agatam, swa agatam, welcome. Or su agatam, not swa, but su agatam, welcome. Exact same meaning, part by part. And then you offer the fruits of your worship back to the deity, and then you make your obeisance. So that's basically the puja process. So many other things could be said, but that's enough for today. And but worship is a wonderful and universal impulse that is in the human heart. And one of the things that will transpire in the near future means in the next century or two, not in the next few days. In the very near future, in the next 100 or 200 or 300 years, will be the development, the evolution, further evolution of worship, so that the elements of worship the meaning of the elements of worship are transparent. So that they're not obscure, so that when you see the worship, you know what it is that it means. Worship, one of the things about worship is that the old is always becomes sacred. And so in ancient times, they wrote in India on birch bark. And so even now, writing on birch bark is especially holy. In the Middle East, they wrote on what do they call sheepskin? Not parchment. I forget. Anyway, but still writing on sheepskin. The Torah on the sheepskin is the most, I forget the name for it, is the most sacred. Or parchment also is sacred. And so everything done in the old way. So the old is honored and maintained through worship, but it shouldn't become so old that we've lost the symbolism. And so it's necessary for worship to be an organic action where the symbolism becomes transparent. So with that, I'll close here. And again, I've gone over time, so I'm sorry there won't be time for question and answers. I apologize for that. So let me give a closing chant, and then I'll give announcements. Om madhuvatartayate madhuksharandhi sindhavaha madhvirna santhoshadhihi madhunaktamutoshasi madhumatparthivagom rajaha madhudyarastu nah pita madhumandho vanaspatir madhumagum astu suryaha madhvirgavo bhavantu nah. Om madhu, om madhu, om madhu. For us who seek the truth, and for all living beings, may the winds blow sweetly. May the rivers flow sweetly. May the herbs yield us sweetness. Sweet be the night and the break of day. Sweet be the very dust of the earth. May the heavens pour down sweetness upon us. May the trees, lords of the forest, bear us sweetness. May the sun shed its. May all the pour forth sweetness. Announcements on